Thank you so much to Micromobility Industries for having me here today and for putting together this really fascinating, I think, conversation that touches on some of the most important and useful insights, hopefully, for companies operating in micromobility today. I'm very pleased to have a really incredible lineup of folks to help take us behind the boom. First up, at the very end, Ian Kenny. He's the global marketing leader at Specialized Bicycles. Next to him, we have Janelle Wang. She's the co-founder and CEO of Acton. And we have Daan Rekker. He's the US general manager at Vanmoof. So lots to cover. I'm sure this 30 minutes is going to fly by. I wanted to start, though, by kind of level setting with each of you and asking sort of what is this boom, right? There's a boom in the title of this. Clearly a boom has happened, but everyone experiences things a little differently. And so how has that boom affected your business? And Dan, we'll start with you.
Yes, thank you so much. So basically the boom for us, and I think many people in our industry refer to the pandemic, to of course a huge boom that everyone saw. I think for us the boom started maybe already a little bit earlier. And our company was founded in 2009, building bicycles, also e-bikes. And in 2015, we went to the US. And we noticed very much in the beginning, in 2015, the e-bike was almost like a different concept. People had a different perception of the purpose of an e-bike. It was a model, usually pedal assist, for seniors, for people who needed the extra assistance. And we trying to kind of break that concept by reinventing the e-bike to a concept almost like we know the e-bike for today, for a great way of commuting, urban commuting specifically. So we constantly had to find ways with our very small team back then to really break that concept, to break the perception. And we always said we want to get the next billion on bikes. Our purpose very much was also to convert people, regular commuters that do transport by public transport, by car, to get them on bikes. And we thought the thing we can win here is we have to lower a lot of barriers, make the e-bike convenient, but also to some extent very sexy to people. Like if you go from home to work commuting every day, you, for example, don't want to arrive sweaty, and that's why the e-bike brought so much, I think, into converting people from public transport to bikes. So that finally started for us to really catch on and to grab, I think, 2018, 2019, and that's also what we so called our boom, I think, happened. Our company grew extremely fast at that point. We found a lot of investors also that want to join the ride for us. We did a lot of crowdfunding, and we grew from a small operation from maybe around 10 people to the company as we are right now today, with over 700 people worldwide, with multiple warehouses, retail locations in the US also.
Great. And Janelle, tell us a little bit about Acton and how this boom period has been for you.
Great. So Acton offers end-to-end micromobility as a service solution packages. So today, to move people and the goods intelligently. So today, our Acton's platform powers more than 100 markets globally with millions of rides and counting. So the boom, we saw this probably more than 2 years ago when you saw Lime Birds started with all the scooters crowded on the street. And then you saw the quality that it's not there. That's early days, right? So of course Acton started more than that. We started as consumer brand in 2014. The company started in the middle of Los Angeles back then, and then as you can know downtown Los Angeles is the center of traffic. There's nowhere to park. And then if you own a car, it's a burden. So that's how we started the Acton, to bring light electric vehicle to everyone. So you get around more freely, have the sense of happiness and the freedom. So of course, 2 years ago when the B2B side shared fleet, we pivoted to B2B. But it's definitely, you saw the demand is high. Everybody wants something, unique, different. But the end goal is all same, to get around the city easily, right? So that's kind of, doesn't matter the form factor, it's the scooters, or it's the e-bikes, or some other delivery vehicles. The structure is similar, just a matter of light electric vehicles, more intelligent light electric vehicles to get people around. That's how we, from the demands from the markets, also from, as we all know, the supply chain, just plan ahead, so we still can meet our demands. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, we're definitely going to get into supply chain. But first, Ian, what does this boom look like from Specialized perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I was joking before we got on stage that I don't think Specialized usually shows up in rooms like this. And that's really largely because we like to joke that we're probably the bike company, you might even have one of our bikes in your garage and you don't know it. We've been operating since 1974, which is quite a long time, under the fundamental belief that bicycles have the power to transform and change lives. Our boom, from my perspective, is really sort of more of a catching up than it is an inflection point. I think in many ways what we've seen over the last year and a half reflects the true demand that is out there for the services and the products that many in this room are bringing forward. And so for us, historically, we serve riders of all different stripes, from Tour de France winning Peloton riders to extreme downhill mountain bikers, and all throughout, we've also been focused on the recreational and transportation-focused rider. For us, what it's reinforced is a fundamental belief and investment that the future for our brand and for our company is as much in the spaces that this room is exploring, and we can bring a perspective and a quality and a scale to that problem that we believe is really meaningful. So it's been a blast, but I also want to just recognize that it's been an incredibly trying time for many of our colleagues and riders throughout the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the really defining characteristics of the last 18 months, 2 years or so, in almost every business, and I definitely come from more of the auto industry, AV side, but supply chains. I mean, it's just been in the news everywhere. All kinds of different forms of challenge, and particularly when you layer sort of increases in demand on top of sort of some supply chain disruptions and things of that nature, you get a really interesting situation. Janelle, I actually want to start with you first, because you said it wasn't that big of an issue, and that's amazing. It's like, tell us your secrets.
Yeah, I'll go back a little bit. Actually, it's really interesting to think this way. Exactly 10 years ago, one of the famous investors said, software will eat the whole world, right? So I think that's 10 years later, we're 2021 today. That's why we're facing all the supply chain challenges, because, nobody really cared about hardware. Nobody cared about infrastructure for almost 10 years. But I would say, never be too late, right? Let's focus on it today and build a better infrastructure, better hardware and software, right? So that's kind of where the point is. For us, of course, there are a lot of supply chains overseas, not made here, but not too bad, because, we Acton builds our own ecosystem that, multiple suppliers, then also we design our own, electronics, and of course the firmware that can be, put into the vehicles. So that's kind of why we say, not too bad, but you have to navigate the system. It's a little bit challenging to navigate system. On the supply chain, not too bad, but then logistics is challenging as well. So that's just on top of that layer, right? So it's not easy. You have to fight for the containers, for shipping. But again, I bring, another point, right? So if things can be made locally, we will, right? So, but of course, we're working on that to make some parts, some electronic components can be made in US, can be made in Europe, can be made locally. Yeah, I think that's the eventual goal. We want to make things, if we sell locally, we'll make it locally. Doesn't matter which market we're in.
Yeah. Daan, has Vanmoof dealt with any kind of supply chain issues? And maybe if you could help us understand, do they seem like they're more of a short-term phenomenon purely by these short-term factors, or is it more of a structural thing, do you think?
Very good question. I also have to disappoint you a little bit here, because our issues, I think, weren't as big as most of our competitors or other people in the same field. We are a direct-to-consumer brand, so it means that we, on an early stage, wanted to own the entire ecosystem of our bike. Our main goal was never supply chain, I think, necessarily, but was to just deliver the best experience, the best package to our riders by just offering a complete integration, like from the moment you buy the bike until service, until the full experience, having the bike yourself. Our product, I think, for the start, we looked for suppliers, and we worked with a lot of suppliers when we were smaller. But with our product, it was quite difficult, we saw, to keep it for the same price if we want to offer the same product. From an early stage, we started to having our own production even. So we were one of the only, I think, e-bike brands of this size that have its own factory. And therefore, our supply chain issues weren't that big, I would say. And it's just because we had the parts, we had the resources. And I think the situation was, for us, a constant challenge, a constant fight. You mentioned also fighting over containers, making sure the product comes here in time, and keeping up with the huge demand also in spike that everyone's experienced over the pandemic. But I think for us, we only gained more confidence in our direct-to-consumer and in our ecosystem, owning the ecosystem within the pandemic.
Yeah, I want to get into logistics a little bit, because that's obviously a big part of this, and also a topic that we see in a bunch of different industries. So I'm really curious how that's affecting micromobility specifically. But before we get there, Ian, also, can you just sort of, on the supply side, I know that Specialized has made some public statements about it being like something like a year before supply chains get back. Obviously, you're a more established company. Sort of on the supply chain stuff, leaving the logistics aside for now, where have those challenges been, and is it purely a short-term thing, or are there going to have to be some structural adjustments?
Yeah, absolutely. So without a doubt, I mean, just for perspective and context, we have a presence in over 100 countries around the world. We have owned operations in over 12. And as a worldwide organization, the scale of our operation is quite vast. As a result, right, as you all know in this room, your supply chain is really only as good as every single part in the final product that you're trying to build. And so for us, what we've seen is, while certain issues have cleared up in certain along certain components, the more complex systems that exist in our e-bikes, for example, we do expect there to be some more prolonged impact. The benefit that we have of scale, and what we believe and have confidence in that allows us to issue the kind of statements that we did, are that we have an owned presence and sort of development team that works directly with some of the biggest suppliers in the world. And so as a result, we can engage in long-term planning efforts with those suppliers directly, as opposed to relying on a middle person to do that brokering for us, and or buying an off-the-shelf system, because we have a lot of control over the system that we build into the bikes. So that's what we've been engaged in over the last period, is to really sort of engage directly with the partners that we know that we're going to need to be reliable in the areas that are going to drive our growth, and we believe we've done that.
Are you able to give any specificity about sort of where some of the specific challenges? Is it batteries? Is it you said more complex components?
Full electronic system, right? So batteries, chips, controllers, I mean, you name it. We have a good amount of control in-house over software and firmware and things like that. But when it comes down to the subcomponents for the system, that's where things get complicated.
And Janelle, you brought up logistics and shipping costs first, and container cost again. It's something you just hear about everywhere, every business. But I'm really curious, sort of in your micromobility business, how has that been a factor, and sort of what have you done to kind of adjust to those shipping costs?
Yeah, so the logistics, everybody, I'm sure probably heard in the past a year to 18 months, right? So it's definitely challenging. I even got phone calls on Saturday morning. One of the customers will call me, say, hey, Janelle, can you make the boat moving faster? I'm like, I wish I can. If I can do that, I'm not in this business, right? I'll just push the wind around. So with that said, right, plan ahead, right? That's kind of always. And when there is availability, grab it. Don't just wait, hey, maybe the price will get better. It only going to be tougher and tougher, more expensive, Of course, a similar thing as kind of one of the, solution providers, what we also want to do is making the package a little bit flatter, so we don't waste the space, we don't ship air, all the way from far away and really expensive, to ship that. So there are multiple things that, be creative and, bring some innovation in this whole challenging time, right? To bring, more efficiency into the system, right? As I mentioned, we Acton owns some patents in the electronics on the software side, so we'll make it locally, so not just shipping everything overseas. That's kind of the planning phase.
And Dan, is this something that the container cost can just be kind of passed on to consumers, or is it something that needs to be dealt with? Like is like onshoring becoming an option? Like completely rethinking where are you resolving the issues?
Good question. I think there's many different initiatives we could take, of course, in solving this logistic issue together. However, I don't think we can ask our riders, our customers to pay for the container cost or anything like that. It's really difficult. I think many companies over time maybe embed it in their price. I think mainly and altogether, I think we might agree on this, that we were quite privileged in the industry and saw also a spike in sales very much in demand. Like there were so many people looking for alternatives to safely get to work or get around other than public transport, for example. So it chose for alternatives, and we saw a huge spike in sales and bikes. And I think that effect alone, I think we can figure out the cost in that. But I agree that there's, I think, many solutions in the container issue. I do really like letting the ship go a lot faster. I hope that's an option ever. So maybe if someone sees it in ships, maybe there's a good invention we can make, making the ships go faster. But yeah, I think there's many different solutions we can make in solving the supply chain issue together.
And Ian, I want your perspective on this as well, because as you mentioned, you have the scale, you have the relationships with the suppliers. There are benefits to that, but it makes it a lot harder to just say, we're pulling out, right? We're going to structurally change our business. But also, as has been said, it's hard to just pass costs along to the consumers. It's also hard to just eat costs. Where are you finding sort of the lesser of a number of tough challenges here?
Yeah, no doubt. Hard trade-offs across the board. And I think as, we can acknowledge the thing, that Dan just mentioned that I think we all share is that we do as much as possible to make sure that the rider isn't bearing the weight of that responsibility and of those trade-offs. So part of it for us has been about, right, we because we are an established longer-term company, we do have a bit of a war chest that we can rely on to eat some of those costs where we need to. But for us, sure, we're always open to exploring new and innovative ways of problem solving. And so, I'd be lying if I said we're not, exploring possibilities and opportunities for what comes next. That said, the relationships that we hold are extremely important, and so those are conversations that we have in partnership with those partners.
So kind of a jump ball real quick. Anybody who wants to answer it, go for it. But are there things on the product side that you've been able to do to kind of address some of these challenges? There have been some stories in other sectors of, replacing a tight component of some kind with something different, making changes to the product side itself. Is that something you've seen or done or would consider?
Yes, definitely. I think there's many opportunities, and also here, mention it that we can do things locally. I think components of every bike, of course, can be swapped out and be reused and refurbished and be repurposed also in the same area. Like the classic model we see is that we have parts that are defective taken off a certain bike and you shipped all the way back to the factory. But I think there's many ways you can do opportunities in the middle of preventing that the product has to be shipped all the way back to its origin. So I think by a smart distribution network of your, for example, parts of components, certain components of the bike, there is definitely ways we can reinvent and we can win a significant amount, I think, of going back and forward of everything. Yeah.
Janelle, did you want to add anything on that on the product side? Yeah.
Yeah, we would like to build, just for instance, we all talked about, the logistics thing, right? So our e-bikes are made in Europe, right, for European markets. So because it can ship some of the parts flat over to Europe, some will be sourced locally. So it's manufactured in Portugal for local customers. So then in the US down the line, of course, that's what we're trying to do as well, right? So down the components wise, just innovation in talking about, intelligent, light electric vehicle, we have, just for instance, we have anti-theft features, right? So that's built into the vehicle, integrated, if it gets stolen, you as a fleet manager or fleet, owners, where everything is, it's in the control. So it's a more efficient way to control it, right? Now, get things stolen easily. And also you can trigger alarm sound from far away, so that's a very good feature. So so people know don't touch Acton bikes because you will know where it is, and you also figure out how to retrieve it, right? So there are just multiple ways. Once you have it, don't lose it, right? Then, the other things would be just, on the, you then touch a little bit, on the recycle side. It's true if we have the batteries, just talking to somebody about recycle the battery side. Once you get all the batteries here, either in the US or in Europe, so you look at the whole life cycle of the products, right? So you can figure out how to recycle the batteries locally because the material is still very valuable. The lithium, that stuff, versus you ship all the way to where it's made. Or, there's just multiple ways, if you already got the shipment here in the US or in Europe, in some other countries, keep it there, use it for another second life. I know for battery, 18650 battery cells, right? So that can be, the second life can be used as a power bank, right? So that there is the after power bank maybe also can be recycled into some other raw material. So there are multiple ways to bring efficiency in our system.
I'll just build on what both Janelle and Dan have said, which is I think for us it's really been about how robust is the product that you're building, and then how are you planning for parts availability? How are you planning for end of life? How are you sharing learnings among suppliers and building capabilities within suppliers to do more at a single location as opposed to needing, right, to make so many journeys? That's something we've thought a lot about, and I'm excited to hear that others are thinking about the battery recycling problem as well. It's an area we put significant investment into within the last year.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating, and especially as batteries. And one of the challenges in all of these supply chain issues, right, is that you're competing with a whole bunch of companies now, right? You compete for parts with electronics companies and automakers now buying the same chips and all these companies. Dan, how does a company like Vanmoof, how do you keep up with that? How do you, the competition specifically for suppliers?
Very question. I think the chip one is the best example, where a shortage is, and there's so many different product and sectors where you need the same product, basically. The same component is a chip in computers, in modern cars, in smartphones, in e-bikes, and everything like that. So I think it's usually the size of the party, which also makes the whole, makes everything, of course, more unfair, because a smaller bike company, it's way harder to get chips to a more established company. Our luck comes a little bit from that we have our own factory once again. So we can already catch it before the stage that a certain component of a bike is manufactured, because we manufacture basically that part ourselves usually. So we can buy the chips in bulk in advance and make sure we have enough supply of that.
Yeah, so I want to kind of shift a little bit to the more the retail, the demand side, really. And Ian, I want to start with you, sort of just how, over the course of this boom, 18 months or so, have you seen changes in who's buying your bikes, maybe where they're buying? What are sort of the new consumption patterns that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, we've seen trends developing along what many others have seen, right? When people got shut inside, where did they go? They went to their phones, their computers. The way that they transacted was changing, which has really accelerated already existing efforts to bring together what is a pretty vast and distributed retailer and distribution network that we hold, to bring on new capabilities, things like the ability to do click and collect orders so that you can place an order online, have it built, set up, picked up at a local retailer. That's a functionality that pre-pandemic, I would say, existed in only our top tier markets and now exists everywhere. Another sort of shift that we've seen for our brand in particular is while there was always a sort of a core of riders who were riding for transportation or more recreationally, that shift in and radical exploration of your local environment during the pandemic, I think really opened a lot of people's eyes to the fact that, you know, the future of local transportation is really going to look a lot more like a bike than a car. And so there is a mindset shift that we've seen in our customer base that has created a really wonderful opportunity for us to engage in new and different ways with that kind of a rider.
Yeah, so I'm going to make you talk a little bit more about that because it's really fascinating. Yeah, bikes have traditionally, and a lot of things, motorcycles even, have traditionally been kind of recreational markets here in the U.S. What is the difference for a company that's been in the bicycle business for as long as Specialized has? What's the difference between a recreation customer and a utility, for lack of a better term, customer?
You know, there's a lot of sort of rooms and focus groups and segmentations that happen about, you know, splitting these riders up. They're all people. And that's the cool thing about it. So somebody who, you know, on the weekend is maybe riding one of our mountain bikes during the week can also be the same rider who wants to use a bike for local transportation with their family. And so while there are certainly barriers to overcome, for us, it's really been about tapping into the mindset of this kind of a rider. What do they need? What are the problems that they need solved? And how can we bring to bear our capabilities to solve those problems, whether it's theft, reliability, you name it, right? A lot of the problems that many on this stage are focused on. And I'll give credit where credit's due. You know, Vanmoof and others in the industry have really led the way on this pre-pandemic that allows for an opportunity now where I think players like Specialized can start to step in and help to participate in that movement. There's plenty of riders out there. There's plenty of opportunity from my perspective. So that's how we're seeing it.
Yeah, and plenty of riders waiting to be made.
Yeah, absolutely.
As part of a household that really got into e-biking, you know, just in the last year.
Yeah, it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people who I think don't necessarily identify as a rider or a cyclist, right, which is how we sort of see that difference panning out. It's a thing you do. You go to a place on that thing. And so that cultural shift, there's an innovation in cultural communication as much as there is product development that I think needs to be made across the industry.
Yeah, and Dan, you got to respond to that, right? So what are some of the kind of, you know, customer care, aftercare things that you've done that you think have really helped you capitalize on this boom?
Yeah, very good question. And first and foremost, of course, I fully agree also with the part that I think we do something here together. And other than, of course, being competitors of each other, I think the true competition we can find in the space of something that we try to conquer is, of course, the gas cars and the gas two-wheelers. So in the pandemic, we saw a huge spike, of course, in demand coming from usually mainly commuters, also from leisure. And I think we all can take a part of that. And we all basically are on the same mission here in supplying the demand and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to find a safe way of getting around. Now, of course, for aftercare, it's also very important. I think a very big aspect over the pandemic that was for a lot of companies very challenging. I think we solved it over any things that, first of all, we were also like already an online company, you can say. We sell majority of our bikes being sold online. So of course, constantly we have to be very creative and also servicing this type of customers. We can only have so much retail locations, and we cannot rely on other third-party retail locations who are not selling our product to service our bike. That's why we come with, for example, things such as our Peace of Mind package. It comes both with a maintenance and also a theft package. The Peace of Mind is basically a standard package, which maintenance comes with intervals. So our bikes work with the app. In that app, you can see when we require service, depending, of course, where you ride, how much you ride, the mileage of the bike also. And later with the theft package, we even guarantee that if your bike gets stolen in a city, because usually people use bikes in our cities, that if your bike gets stolen, we physically return the bike back to you within 2 weeks. In case we fail, we replace your bike. So we're pretty confident about technology as well.
And Janelle, do the new buyers in this boom, do they have kind of special needs? Are there things you need to do that you weren't necessarily doing before? And if so, like especially for that after sales piece of it, I mean, is there a way to handle a lot of that stuff without just spending a lot of money to have a physical presence in a lot of big markets?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we definitely see, pre-COVID, the pandemic time is mainly kind of rideshare operators, right, as our customers. but definitely growing significantly in other space, like real estate management companies, hotel chains. There are also cities, governments contracts as well, because cities definitely see the opportunity to bring light electric vehicles as a part of the transportation system into their city. We all know Paris is a leading 15-minute city, right? It's doing a wonderful job there. A lot more cities actually say, oh, that's a wonderful idea, right? Why don't we bring that into our city? So we see that as well. So another huge industry is, food grocery delivery system, right? So in the past, often you see a car, DoorDash, you order $10 pizza, they drive a big car, come to deliver. It doesn't make sense, So from economic side, efficiency way, it's really using a light electric vehicle to deliver. It makes total sense, especially in New York, in large cities. You drive a car, probably takes longer for you to find a parking space, right? You might get more ticketing, than the money you make. So that's why I think light electric vehicle will play a more significant role, after pandemic. More and more people realize, how fun and how much, the premium experience, the enjoyed rides, that bring to, if it's for delivery, it's for work, right? But for commute people from A to B to work, that's a fun commute. So that's, I think, that people definitely realize that after, this whole time.
Yep, and we're almost out of time, so I want you each in 60 seconds or less to kind of just, out of all the things we talked about, supply side, demand side, what are going to be what is the one or maybe a couple most important factors in order to keep this boom going? Is it on the supply side? And maybe a little bit of detail on where exactly you see that. And we'll start with you, Dan.
Thank you. I think the mainly is to keep showing the benefits of biking. I think for all of us you cannot just point at people and say, hey, you have to use a bike because there's so much benefits to it. I think you have to start with making, of course, it a very convenient, cool, and sexy experience for people to do so in the first place. I think that's the biggest stake to get the boom going. And the second of all is, of course, keep up with also the demand and making sure you can service these people, make sure they feel, of course, part of the lifestyle of the community.
Janelle.
All right, so I would think, intelligent hardware and software will bring you the delicious lunch, right? So let's focus on the infrastructure, the hardware and the software. Then also, plan ahead, then because this continues the booming, then, if you need to previously plan 3 months ahead, and now you probably need to think about 4 or 5 months ahead. So it's not always the last minute. Of course, the rides will be more fun and brighter.
And speaking of last minute, Ian, last word to you.
Sneak it in. I think for us, it's what I mentioned on the supply side, long-term planning with key partners, making our bets now, and understanding that it feels less risky than it did because we now understand the true demand and the catching up. And then on the innovation side, culturally, for me, it's really about continuing to open our arms for those of us who have experienced this transformation that we're talking about. It's how do we make the industry more inclusive? How do we make what a rider means more inclusive? How do we focus on having person-to-person conversations to share that experience? Because that's something that no technology can replace.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank each of you so much for taking the time. I found this really, really fascinating. So one last time, Dan Rekkers from Vanmoof, Janelle Wang from Acton, and Ian Kenny from Specialized. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights today.